Happy Sunday, Dragon Folk. Hopefully we're all doing fantastic. I love to see all of you. Thank you all so much for coming to the video today. And hey, we're inching even closer to 200 subscribers, so we're getting there. With your help, you guys continue to watch the videos, continue to leave your comments, continue to like the videos, continue to subscribe. We're going to grow faster than I've ever expected. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. So today's video, right? We're talking about the reserved list, the ever infamous reserved list for Magic the Gathering. So the reserved list, what that is, right? The reserved list is a list of cards starting from Alpha all the way to Urza's Destiny that will not be reprinted, right? It's a list of a couple hundred cards or something, not even a ton of cards in the grand scheme of things, but these cards will never be reprinted. They just won't. They won't be reprinted. There will never be a card that has the same effect or name as the cards that are on this list, right? And the entire point of that, right? The entire point of the reserve list back in the day was because there were collectors who wanted something for themselves, right? The game was a game, right? And it still is a game to this day. But collectors wanted something that was truly for the collectors. And so they started making this reserved list, right? And all the way up until the year 2000, right? They took stuff out, they put stuff in, they took stuff out, they put stuff in, like they were switching out things, what should be in the reserve list, what shouldn't be. And it was, a lot of people were just like, okay, cool, right? These are things that you can put aside and it's a nice little collector piece and so on and so forth. But right around it, with Urza's Destiny, they stopped, right? Which I believe was 99. So with the end of it, with Urza's Destiny, and then a couple tweaks here and there after, they finalized a reserve list. And the reason they finalized it is because truly they didn't want to keep adding, removing, changing cards or whatever. This was like, the list of cards was getting to be either too large or people wanted other things on it and people were all up in arms. But the reserve list ended up finalizing itself, right? And what we see today has been the reserve list for many years, right? Decades at this point. So I'm going to give you my opinion on what I feel about the reserve list and, the general, a response to the general outcry for the reserve list to be abolished, right? For the reserve list to go away. And a lot of people, right? If you agree with me, right, let me know in the comments. If you are going to flame me for my thoughts, also do that in the comments, right? I'm not against discussion, right? As long as it's healthy and it's not somebody typing in all caps saying, "Oh, bro, I can't believe you think this way. Oh, you're such a ridiculous individual, and you should turn your channel off and never make a YouTube video." That's not helpful, right? I love conversation. I love having these talks, and I would rather do that with all of you, regardless on our talking point, than have you just scream at me through a keyboard. You know what I mean? So let's keep it civil. But my opinion on the reserved list is pretty straightforward, right? My opinion on the reserve list is I view it as a Kickstarter, right? So I view it as a Kickstarter. You were there the first 8 to 10 years of Magic, right? It's really 8 years-ish. Really, 8 years. And you have been playing since then, right? You've kept your cards. You've never stopped playing. You've been there since the beginning. You've enjoyed the concept of the game. You did all this. This reserved list, while it was, it's for collectors at the end of the day, right? It doesn't mean that the players can't get in on it too, right? So we're going to talk about a couple things in what I mean by that, right? What I mean is a Kickstarter, right, is that usually with most Kickstarters or GoFundMe's or, there's a bunch of up-and-coming TCGs that are available. Some that have launched, right? I believe Cryptic did something along the lines of this. I don't know how the actual game is played, but I know they did like a special thing. So when you start up a Kickstarter, right, you have goals to meet. And when you meet these goals, these stretch goals, right, usually you give the people who have been supporting you throughout this entire thing at a certain tier, you give out prizes, right, like gifts. And you just be like, hey, like, yeah, you gave us $100. Well, $100 will get you one of the very first edition booster boxes of the game, right? This booster box will never be made ever again. It's got a bunch of test cards in it. It's got a bunch of this other stuff, like all these things in it. And this is where the limited stuff goes into play, right? They limit the product that they have because obviously it's just starting. And when they limit that product, the people who genuinely support the game, they want to take that product and they want to go, yeah, like I do have faith in this product. I want to start collecting it. I want to start playing it. I want to start doing all this. And they put their money towards the company, and that company will either grow or sink depending on the situation. And you'll just kind of go from there. But that's how I feel what the reserved list is. Alpha, didn't have a very heavy print run, right? It didn't even have a very light print run. It was almost non-existent. Wizards, I'm sure, didn't even expect the game to be as popular as it was back in the day. I don't even remember if Wizards owned the thing since the beginning, right? I'm pretty sure my history is right. But Alpha was not printed a lot. There was not a lot of it, which is why Alpha cards are so rare to find in good condition these days. I mean, there's just wasn't a lot of them. And whatever one there is, usually you can expect a product to lose like 25%, maybe even 30% of its product simply because you got it in the hands of kids. You didn't have as many like card protection stuff as you do today because there weren't, there's no one's sleeves. People would rubber band their decks when they brought them to school. Like, I mean, not many of the cards survived then, right? So you see that stuff. And, obviously then they came out with Beta, which was just Alpha again, but in a slightly different cardboard, backing. Then, of course, Beta was still not enough, and so people asked for more, and so they came out with Unlimited, right? Unlimited is a white-bordered version of Alpha and Beta. And then, later on, down the line, after the first two expansions of Antiquities and Arabian Nights, came Revised, right? Revised is they took out a lot of the stuff from Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited, and they kept some things, but they mainly took a lot of reprinted cards from Arabian Nights and from Antiquities and put them into a Revised, along with some stuff like the dual lands, right? From Alpha, Beta, Unlimited. Dual lands are probably the best thing you can find out of Revised, but it's a core set nonetheless. So what this is a Kickstarter, right? If you have been backing Magic the Gathering since its creation, you have profited. The same thing goes for things like Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin, when it started, I think you could buy Bitcoin for like $10. Now it's like $26,000. You know what I mean? When you back something in its early stages and you have full faith in the product, and the product actually goes somewhere, you have a stake in that. So that's my first talking point in regards to the reserve list and how I personally feel about it. My next talking point is to all the people who believe the reserve list should not exist, right? Now, I'm one to say that I think that all cards should be available, right? I think they should, to an extent, right? Because obviously you do still have those collectors, right? Wizards made the promise to the collectors back in the 90s. They're going to continue to do that today, and they've done that through making a modern version of reserve list cards, right? You've got the Mystical Archives from Strixhaven. You have the Japanese anime arts from War of the Spark. You have the the box topper Godzilla and Dracula stuff. You have the Secret Lairs. You have the Hitotsugu, right? You have the neon ink Hitotsugus. You have the gilded foils. You have the inventions and the invocations, right? Those things are all reserved list, but not in the actual reserve list. These are collectible cards that, as far as we know, are never going to get printed in that same way again, right? Will they print Sol Ring again? Obviously they did 100,000 times. You get one in just about every Commander precon, which is great because Sol Ring is a staple to many Commander decks. But you'll never get a Sol Ring in the same way that it is in the inventions, right? You just won't. Like, that's a huge deal. There is a modern version of a reserved list, right? And that's just all these other cards that are special and not to be reprinted in a different way and won't ever see, printings again in the future, as far as we know. Now, because they're not on the reserved list, theoretically, they could reprint them, right? Theoretically. They could reprint them in a different art, in a different way that makes them still the same thing, but in a different light, right? They could come out with the Kaladesh inventions, if we ever go back to Kaladesh, but they could call them something else and just add a different border on it and name it, experiments or something, right? And they could do the same cards that were in the inventions, but it seems not likely is what I'm saying. It doesn't seem likely that that's going to be the case. So I guess really what I'm going over here is that there's cards available now as a reserve list that will be, looked over, right? New collectibles that aren't reserve list for people to collect. So the collectors are still in line and are still, enjoying the cool special product that they're able to get and nobody else can get. They enjoy that. But the players, right? The players' outcry is that they want all cards available to everybody at reasonable prices, right? I mean, they want that, right? They want to be able to get themselves a Mox Emerald or a Black Lotus or a Time Walk or, a Mox Ruby or some, or maybe even a Tabernacle of Pendrell Vale, right? They want to be able to get these cards for more reasonable prices than thousands of dollars, right? But they can't because the collectability of those cards, these reserve list cards, are so strong and are so hard to find because there are just not enough of them that they go for that much, right? That's what their price is on the market. But if Wizards reprinted those, right? If they reprinted the cards on the reserve list, even if we're just talking about the Power 9, if they reprinted the Power 9, everybody else who kind of got in the game early, right? All those people who were the kickstarters of Magic the Gathering, they lose out on their beginning love for the game, their exclusive pieces of a game that they chose to love from the beginning until now, right? They lose out on the actual value of that. So therefore, it is Wizards pandering to everybody, right? Instead of just, instead of creating new things and making that happen. Speaking of creating new things, let's also talk about the fact that the reserve list has a lot of cards on it that kind of suck, right? There are cards on the reserve list from Tempest or Mirage that are only going for like $4, $6 for one of these cards. You can buy 6 reserve list cards for the same price you can buy a Resplendent Angel, which isn't on the reserve list. What does that say, right? There are reserve list cards that are available, but most of the ones that aren't are the ones from ABU and the Four Horsemen. The rest of them, pretty available, I would say. Maybe not in near mint, but you can get them pretty regularly, right? The revised dual lands you can find. Are they hundreds of dollars? Yes, but so is buying 4 Resplendent Angels for your Angel deck is $120, $130 probably. So why not just put that money towards a reserve list card if you really want it, right? Not to mention the fact that, like I said, a lot of these reserve list cards kind of just suck. They were put on the reserved list as a sense because they were like, oh, they're iconic cards, or they're rares, or they're special. Some of them are powerful, obviously, like Black Lotus, right? It's a powerful card. But what's to stop Wizards from making a card that's better than Black Lotus? Just an artifact that that you pay 3 and it comes in tapped, but you can tap it and add 4 colorless to your mana pool, but you have to take 5 life, right? Granted, there's a lot of stipulations with that because you got to pay 3, and then it comes in tapped, and then you can tap it to pay 4, or to get 4 to your mana pool, but then you also lose 5 life, right? It's pretty extensive, but Wizards of the Coast can make any card they want. Anything, right? So why in the world would you want them to take off the reserved list and reprint these cards? Also, let's talk about the idea behind reprinting these cards, right? If the reserve list was reprinted, right? If the Power 9 and all the stuff in ABU was reprinted into a new set, right? ABU remastered or something, right? If they did that, do you still think that the prices of the old cards would hold true to their value? Honestly, I think a lot of them will, just out of scarcity alone, right? You may be the owner of a newly printed Black Lotus, but that other Black Lotus only had 1,000 versions of itself. So it's rarer. So for a collector, it is still rare to have that card. For a player, obviously, you can get that. But let's take a look at, this is the example I wanted to go into. Let's take a look at Imperial Seal, right? Imperial Seal is a card that is not on the reserve list, right? It's not on there, right? So the first printing of Imperial Seal was from Portal 3 Kingdoms. And that Imperial Seal is not on the reserve list, obviously, because it just got reprinted in Double Masters 2022. And it got a base set, it got a base foil, it got a foil etched, it got a borderless, and a borderless foil. 5 versions of the card were made specifically for the last set to come out. And you're thinking, okay, well, these cards are probably going to be super cheap since they were printed a whole lot and yada yada, and it's this whole big deal. And the price of the Portal 3 Kingdoms one was going to go down significantly. Well, I'll be here to tell you that the Portal 3 Kingdoms version of the card, the one that is still super rare to find, right? Portal 3 Kingdoms was not printed to a super extent. It was very hard to find the packs, and it was very obviously you had to pull these cards. It was hard to find for the English because when it came out, there wasn't a lot of the English cards. There were a lot. There was not a lot of supply for this product, right? So its price went higher when there were special cards in there, right? The special rares and so on and so forth, because obviously the rares are going to be harder to hit on. And more specifically, Imperial Seal had it was a tutor, right? There weren't a whole ton of tutors back in the day. So I'd imagine this was an okay thing to put into your deck because it was just a cool thing. But nobody was ever able to find them, right? Their print runs were significantly lower, and it was hard to find. Now, we look at the market price for this, and it's still almost $1,800 for an Imperial Seal from Portal 3 Kingdoms. For a base version of Imperial Seal from Double Masters 2022, you're looking at about $140 for one, right? Which goes to show that even if they're reprinted, they're still going to be expensive. Now, is $140, significantly less than $1,800? Yeah, of course it is. But that doesn't mean that most people are going to go out and drop $140 on a Imperial Seal, right? I mean, it just doesn't seem feasible to me, right? You even had the Judge promo, which was, it's upwards of $650, and that card is still more expensive than the Imperial Seals that were just reprinted, right? So people who want the reserve list abolished, they just want cheaper versions of the cards so that they could play them. But again, I go into this thought process, and I have reserve list cards, but I don't have enough to the point where I'm like, oh my god, my whole empire is going to fall if the reserve list gets reprinted, right? I don't think that the reserve list cards are necessary for you to have fun. Because something else you also have to think about is that there are only certain formats in which you can even play these cards, right? If they reprinted Black Lotus, you'd only be able to play it in Commander, Vintage, and Legacy. That's it. Nobody I know plays Vintage on a regular basis, unless you're some kind of high-rolling store in a city that makes hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars on a regular basis, and you have nothing but whales who go there, and they all have Vintage decks. They can play Vintage, right? Legacy, I don't see a lot of play from Legacy players either, but again, I live in a bunch of areas where people can barely afford Pioneer decks, So the general populace of Magic players are probably not playing Legacy, and they're not playing Vintage. What they are playing is Commander, and people are genuinely upset because they can't play a Black Lotus. But even if you were to reprint Black Lotus is banned in Commander. There are a lot of old reserve list cards that are banned in Commander. So what's the point? What are they going to do? Take it off the ban list? No. It doesn't matter. Like, these things don't matter, right? So this is where I'm trying to go with this all, right? The outcry for the reserve list to be abolished and is nonsensical, right? I get that people want to have all cards available, right? And not have to spend $15,000 for a card that they can put in their deck. I get that. But I don't think it matters anymore. Right? We're 20 years past the reserve list at this point. 22 years past the reserve list at this point. There have been cards that have come out that have been better than most of the cards from the reserve list. Most of the cards from the reserve list don't even make sense to use these days, right? Chaos Orb? When in the world are you ever going to play Chaos Orb? You're not. And that's what I'm talking about, right? Everybody is just upset because they didn't get in on it early, right? I didn't get in on it early. Obviously, I was just being born around the time that Magic was coming to existence. But that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy the game in other ways. I believe that you can enjoy Magic the Gathering without needing to get the reserve list, because it's not the game, right? There are still new cards that you can collect that are just as rare as reserve list stuff. I just bought the secret lair for Here Be Dragons, right? Was only printed. There was only 10,000 printings of it. That is rare. You need to look at things that have low print runs or very hard to find, right? The Hitotsugu, the neon ink Hitotsugus. The blue ones, super common to find, look like they're only going for like $90 on the market right now. The green ones, a little bit more expensive, somewhere around $100, $200, or right? But they're more uncommon to find, right? But then you look at the red Hitotsugu, the red neon ink Hitotsugu. That card, there aren't a lot of them listed, and not many of them. I don't know how many people are pulling them or what the actual print run is. But if the collector boxes are the only ones that have them, and the collector boxes are on a limited print run themselves to a number we are not sure of, then that means that there's only a certain amount of red ink Hitotsugus, and it's probably less than 10,000. It's probably less than 10,000. Hell, it's probably less than 5,000. So the rarity of the true price of the card is how much it's printed, right? And from a gameplay aspect, right, Hitotsugu is also not a very good card. I didn't see play at all. I still don't see play of Hitotsugu, right? If somebody's playing Hitotsugu, tell me, right? Tell me what you're doing with your deck that you want to play Hitotsugu. I haven't seen anybody play it, right? Because they're just not gonna, right? They chose a bulk rare from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and they went, let's add crazy art to it, right? We'll make it the card to chase. So that way it's not like the Wandering Emperor, right? Could you imagine if they made the Wandering Emperor a neon ink card? That, I mean, gosh, like, that's insane, right? People can not only use that on a regular basis because it's a fantastic planeswalker, but it's already got a high price point, and it's not even. I think the foil etched Wandering Emperor is going for more than the green and the blue neon ink Kamigawa, the Hitotsugus. So there are things to collect, right? If you want to get into the collecting scene of Magic the Gathering and you want some special cards, look at the I have a video. I'll put a video up here. The ampersand cards for Dungeons and Dragons, right? There were probably less than 1,000 cards for each card printed. That's really rare. Those are rare cards, especially since one of them is an old Gnawbone, one of the most powerful dragons in modern day right now. Like, those are cards to collect. Those are cards to look at to try and collect. That ampersand collection. You have the inventions. You have the invocations. You have the Strixhaven Mystical Archives art, right? Whether it be the actual Mystical Archives art, the English, or the Japanese. Both of those things are special arts that won't be reprinted that way again. These, we're just circling back, right? There's more stuff for you to collect than just the reserve list. If you want to start collecting reserve list stuff because you feel like you missed out, do what I'm doing, right? Go start with the Dark, right? The most expensive card in the Dark right now, which is one of the very first sets to come out, it's part of the Four Horsemen, right? You've got City of Shadows, right? City of Shadows is the most expensive card in the Dark right now. And it is going for a whopping $175. Near mint. $175 last I checked. So with that being the case, you can start there. The Dark is a very good set. There's a lot of fun stuff in it. You can start collecting reserve list cards from there. And then just work your way down, right? Look into stuff from, Fallen Empires is not a very fantastic set. Not many people liked it, but it's old and it's not printed to a crazy amount. So it's still history. Tempest, Ice Age, Mirage, right? Urza's Legacy, Urza's Destiny, Urza's Saga. Look for the foil cards in Urza's Legacy or Urza's Destiny, right? If you find a reserve list card in foil, those are expensive, but there's a reason for that, right? So that's kind of what I'm talking about here, is that you can still get into some stuff. It's still not too late. You can still look at the reserve list stuff and go, oh yeah, no, I totally didn't collect it. But don't think that people need to get rid of the reserve. Don't think that Wizards is ever going to get rid of the reserve list cards just because enough people are angry about it, right? There's so much riding. Legal action, there's distrust in the company. There's so many things that would ruin Magic the Gathering if the reserve list cards were reprinted, right? There are so many things that could go wrong, and they don't want to be on the back end of that, right? They don't want to be the ones to have to take care of all these legal issues on a regular basis because they promised that they were never going to do this anymore. But that's all it is, right? It's all it is they can make better versions of the cards, guys. Better versions. There can be a better Black Lotus, a better Mox Ruby, a better Time Walk, right? Look at Alrund's Epiphany. Alrund's Epiphany is a pretty yeah, you have to do a little bit more, but look at the absolute nonsense it caused during the last rotation of Standard, when everybody was using Alrund's Epiphany and just making a whole bunch of crazy dragon bird things and just going for face. It can happen, right? It can happen. There are cards that they can make better, and they often do. So don't get your panties in a bunch for the reserve list cards, right? Look towards modern stuff to collect if need be. Look towards collecting what reserve list cards you can, right? Because there's still a lot available that are only at like $4. You can make it happen. You can do it. Okay? Just don't be upset when you can't play with your Black Lotus. And if you really want to play with a Black Lotus, ask your play group whether or not they're okay with you proxying. Because proxying is another thing that a lot of people do. A lot of people who can't afford Magic cards can afford a 5-cent fake so that they could play their friends. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, I've talked long enough about this. You guys get the point. Reserve List is a Kickstarter. It's a Kickstarter for people who were into Magic back in the day and who've continued to play it and who enjoyed the game throughout and didn't take any kind of break in between. And that was Magic, right? And now we have new stuff to look towards, right? You can't be stuck in the past forever. And Wizards certainly isn't going to stay in the past forever, other than the fact that they brought back a whole bunch of Legends cards for Dominaria United. But, we'll see how that turns out. Well, that's pretty much it for me. So thank you all so much for watching. I do truly appreciate your support as always. I do hope to bring more of these, discussion topic videos to play. Maybe we'll get a one-on-one discussion between individuals on the channel where we can talk about things like this in a more direct thing. I like talking to people instead of at a screen, so maybe we can get something like that set up. I also plan to do more dueling videos. I should be doing some Commander content with my friends sometime soon. Through Tabletop Simulator. And then I do also have some stuff on Arena that I'd like to record as well. So keep your eye out for that. But until then, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel as well if you have not already, and check out our Patreon down in the description below. Hoping to get a lot of people through there so that way we can start busting out some goodies for all you and, to really show my my appreciation for your support for this Kickstarter, which is pretty much my channel. So thank you again. And remember, to make it a great day or not, the choice is up to you. And I'll see you all in our next video. All right, nerd out.